Returning to the apartment where he learned how to disappear, Evan never expected the walls to remember him. Yet the moment he stepped inside the aging building at the edge of the city, something shifted, as if the silence recognized his name. Grief had brought him back after his uncle's sudden death, but loneliness kept him there. Lying awake at night as the building breathed around him with flickering lights and whispering pipes, until the soft knocking began not at the door, but from inside the walls, and when the hallway mirror moved on its own, Evan saw a man step out of his reflection, pale, quiet, and heartbreakingly familiar. A ghost named Lucas, who had died there after learning the same cruel lesson. Evan once did that. Being quiet doesn't protect you from pain. Lucas didn't haunt him with violence, but with understanding, appearing only after midnight, speaking of unreturned love, of staying invisible too long, of how loneliness can bind a soul tighter than chains, and Evan felt the terrifying comfort of being truly seen for the first time. Yet the apartment didn't welcome their connection, responding with slamming doors, cracking mirrors, and shadows that stretched whenever their bond deepened, because the place fed on fear and wanted Lucas to remain alone. As Evan stayed longer, the building grew angrier, the nights colder, forcing a choice between escape and loyalty, between survival and love. And when the walls finally erupted in a violent roar of breaking glass and screaming metal, Evan realized the apartment could trap bodies, but not courage. And by refusing to abandon Lucas, by choosing connection over fear, he broke the hold of the place that thrived on silence, allowing Lucas to finally release his pain and fade peacefully, leaving Evan alive, changed, and no longer afraid to be seen, carrying with him the quiet truth that love, even when it begins in darkness, can still lead you safely out. As the nights passed, Evan began to understand that Lucas was not bound to the apartment by anger but by unfinished longing, and each time the clock crept past midnight, the air thickened with the weight of memories that were never allowed to breathe. Memories Lucas revealed slowly, carefully, like wounds that had healed wrong. He spoke of loving quietly in a world that demanded silence, of learning how to fold himself smaller so no one would notice, the way his eyes lingered too long, or his voice softened when he cared. And Evan listened not as a visitor, but as someone hearing his own past spoken back to him, realizing that fear had shaped them both in the same way, even across life and death. The building, however, seemed to sense their growing closeness, responding with sudden, cold drafts that wrapped around Evan's ankles, lights that shattered without warning, and whispers that crawled under his skin, calling his name in voices that were not Lucas's voices, full of hunger rather than sorrow, as if the place itself resented being robbed of the loneliness it fed on. One night, when Evan reached out and his fingers passed through Lucas's hand, the contact sent a shock through the room, mirrors cracking, doors slamming shut, and shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. Yet in that brief moment of connection, Evan felt something unmistakable: comfort, warmth, a fragile intimacy that existed beyond touch. Lucas confessed then that the apartment punished him whenever he felt hope, that every attempt to move on, to be seen, had been met with violence from the walls that wanted him silent forever. And Evan felt fear coil in his chest, not of Lucas, but of what staying might cost him, because the building had begun to follow him even during the day, reflections lingering too long, footsteps echoing behind him in empty streets. Reminders that once something notices you, it does not easily let go. Still, despite the growing terror, Evan found himself staying later each night, drawn not by curiosity, but by the ache of recognition. Because for the first time in his life, someone understood the exhaustion of hiding. And as the apartment groaned and shifted like a living thing preparing to strike, Evan realized that leaving would mean surviving. But staying meant choosing love in a place that thrived on fear. By the third week, the apartment no longer hid its intentions, and Evan understood that the whispers, the shadows, and the violence were not random manifestations of decay, but the echo of countless lives swallowed by silence. Souls who had been forced to erase themselves until the building learned how to feed on absence, on shame, on people who were told they did not belong. And Lucas finally admitted the truth he had avoided. he had not died by accident, but by despair, crushed by years of hiding, by loving in secret, by believing that disappearing was safer than being seen. And the moment those words left him, the apartment erupted in fury. Walls bleeding, cracks, floors trembling, voices screaming in layered anguish as if the structure itself rejected the idea of truth. Evan was thrown against the wall, breath knocked from his lungs, and for the first time he felt real terror not of death, but of losing Lucas to the darkness that clawed at him, trying to pull him back into submission. And in that chaos, Evan did the one thing the building could not tolerate. He spoke Lucas's name loudly, clearly, without fear, declaring his existence, his love, his right to be remembered. And with each word, the shadows recoiled, the screams fractured, because fear loses power when it is named. Lucas, shaking, translucent, finally allowed himself to be seen fully, no longer hiding the softness of his smile or the ache in his eyes. And as Evan reached out again, the air warmed instead of freezing, the violence slowing as if the apartment itself were weakening, unable to survive exposure. In that final moment, Lucas pressed his forehead to Evan's, a gesture of intimacy stronger than touch, thanking him for choosing love over safety, for refusing to let him vanish quietly. And when the first light of dawn cut through the windows, the building fell silent, not peaceful, but emptied, its hunger-starved. Evan woke alone on the floor. The apartment strangely ordinary, no whispers, no cold, no shadows stretching where they should not, and though Lucas was gone, the space he left behind was not hollow but full, filled with the certainty that some connections transcend fear, life, and even death. Months later, when Evan moved on, carrying the memory with him rather than the weight, he no longer flinched at his reflection or lowered his voice when speaking his truth, because love had taught him something fear never could, that being seen is not what destroys us. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to disappear, and in that quiet victory, Evan realized the haunting had ended not because the ghost was gone, but because he was finally free.